Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, and on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Moman Seshardi, Executive Director of the Asian Pacific Islander Political Alliance. Vanessa Maria Graber will join us live from the Mayor's Chinatown Arena Town Hall and will report on this past Saturday's anti-arena rally. Lance Haber will discuss SEPTA's fare increase. And Denise Clay-Murray will share her thoughts on yesterday's presidential debate. It is a packed show, so we're going to get right to our interview with the APIPA. All right. Mohan Seshardi, the Executive Director of the Asian Pacific Islander Political Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get started talking about the Sixers arena, can you tell us a little bit about the APIPA?
Sure. So we're Pennsylvania's Asian American Civil Rights Organization. We were founded by leaders in Chinatown as well as leaders in other Asian communities in South Philly, especially, to make sure that our community had an advocacy voice, a political voice, a voice when it comes to the decisions that government makes that affects our lives. So overall, our work is statewide in 22 languages in every Asian community all across Pennsylvania, making sure that their elected officials are accountable to our communities in a way that has just never really happened before. But because we were founded by leaders in Chinatown who came out of decades and decades of fighting off previous development and displacement attempts, of fighting to make sure Chinatown remains whole and safe for our community, we've had a really active role in this fight, very much kind of following the lead of local Chinatown leaders and Chinatown organizations, but backing them up with our political know-how, our advocacy know-how, making sure that our folks have the tools they need to fight this thing and protect our communities home for another generation.
So when you found out about the arena, the proposed arena, what were the initial thoughts here?
Honestly, my initial thought, everybody I talked to, in that initial time period, everybody said the exact same thing, and that was some version of again. People are trying this again. Our leaders, the folks who founded our organization, the folks who trained our organizers, they were involved in the 2000 Philly Stadium debacle. They were involved in the casino fight about 15 years ago as well. And so they have this record and their legacy. Literally, we're talking grandparents, parents, and kids who grew up on the picket lines fighting to protect Chinatown. And just the impact of every 5 years, every 10 years, every 20 years of having to fight to protect our home. It's trained and skilled up a bunch of leaders who know how to get this thing done, but it also the emotional impact, the psychological impact of always having to fight to protect your home. It's certainly wearing on our folks, and especially after 2 long years of this fight, we're hoping that City Council and the mayor finally hears our voices and the voices of everyday Philadelphians all across the city and put this thing to bed.
How devastating would this be for Chinatown?
Incredibly, those impact studies just came out last week, and as flawed as they are, as especially that economic impact study we've talked about was specifically concocted to avoid showcasing any negative impact on Chinatown, right? It was they carefully crafted it so that it only shows positive economic benefit. It doesn't actually study or survey the net negative economic impact on Chinatown small businesses and Chinatown's local economy. It very much stops at the water's edge in terms of surveying that. But the community impact study says that 50% of Chinatown businesses would be negatively impacted. And we know from our years of history in the community, when the small businesses go, the community goes, right? If folks are used to getting into Chinatown, not just to worship or go to school, but to get dim sum, to get pho, to get boba and hang out with their friends, if those businesses shutter, not just from a massive arena snarling up traffic and congestion, but also from 6 years of construction causing street closures, causing pollution and smog, making it harder for delivery drivers to go to and from Chinatown, and our business owners having access to that aspect of business, Chinatown will fold. This is coming on the heels of multiple years of violence against our community, violence against our small businesses that was driven by the pandemic. And so Chinatown is already very much kind of on a precipice. And as we've been saying, we're deeply concerned that this will push us over the edge. And we think that those impact studies, again, deeply flawed as they are, do sufficiently show this is going to be an existential threat to Chinatown. And I think it explicitly says this is going to threaten the cultural fabric, the cultural vitality of Chinatown. And that's why we go to Chinatown. We go to feel safe walking the streets. We go to feel part of our community and our culture. We go to celebrate birthdays, to have funerals, to be with our people when in times of joy and mourning. If that goes down, there's no locus of our community there anymore. And so we do see this as an existential threat, as well as, quite frankly, just a bad deal for Philly, right? Chinatown small businesses, and Chinatown's culture and community, that brings investment, not just from the rest of Philly, but from all across the greater Philadelphia area. And there are folks who come from all over the country to celebrate festivals in Chinatown. There are Chinese communities for whom Chinatown has the only community centers for their specific ethnic community or religious community, not just in the country, but all of North America. And we see that as, that's economic vitality too. That's an economic investment too. The model of Chinatown isn't the model of these developers where their entire profit margin, their entire profit motive is, let's build a big thing. Let's push a working class community of color out. Let's buy up all that land and let's flip it for profit. And we think Chinatown shows what happens when you invest in immigrant communities, invest in working class communities of color. We can see we're able to have safe communities. We're able to have thriving communities. But these big business and these big developments, these big box development, threatens that in a way that it makes rich people richer, but it doesn't actually benefit everyday working families here in Philly.
In your interactions with the Sixers and you bring these concerns up, how do they respond to it?
I mean, I think it's certainly indicative that, even that first announcement that we just talked about, it was very much, we found out when everyone else found out, right? We found out by press conference and press release. It was very much, this thing is happening, get on board. And yes, we'll throw a little money your way, to make you feel better about it. Certainly not enough, right? If we think about, the CBA broken down over 30 years, but it was very much, this is happening regardless of whether or not you consent, regardless of whether or not you want it. And they've spent a lot of money, millions of dollars on their PR and lobbying operation ever since then to try to convince everybody that they want to be a good neighbor to us as well as other local communities like Wash West. But when you get down to how they've actually dealt with the community, they tried to sneak legislation through to jumpstart the arena construction back in the end of 2022. We found out about it at the 11th hour and we shut it down, but they certainly didn't give us a heads up that they were trying to sneak that legislation through. They got caught spending dark money to support candidates, or allegedly spending dark money to support candidates who were backing the arena. They got caught hiding the amount of lobbying money that they were spending to get this thing across the finish line. And they haven't even bothered to invest in basic things like regular meetings with our community, town halls in the community. They haven't even bothered to invest in the language access necessary to ensure that our elders have as much a seat at the table when having these discussions as English speakers and younger members of our community. And so it's pretty clear to us that, they can spend a lot of money on PR. They can talk a great game about community engagement. But when it comes down to brass tacks and how they've actually gone about it, they've really shown kind of a really naked lack of interest in actually authentically engaging with our community and getting our consent in any meaningful way.
All right. I'd like to bring Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Over the summer, there were virtual town halls held by the Sixers to talk about the development, and I recall one of them being in Mandarin and another being in another Asian dialect, and I can't remember off the top of my head, not because I'm being ignorant or anything, but because it's been a very long couple of weeks for me.
Exactly.
But what was the response to those? Do you know? Because I sat in on one of the virtual town halls that they had in English, but they did one thing that kind of stuck out to me is they didn't really take questions.
Mhm.
And they were talking about having an in-person town hall in the not too distant future. That hasn't been scheduled yet.
Mhm. So in terms of those town halls specifically, I mean, first, exactly what you said, right? Like it was a presentation with no questions, right? There was no opportunity for feedback. There was no opportunity for dialogue. Again, it was very much, we're going to throw a lot of numbers at you. We're not going to provide any evidence to back up these numbers, but we're going to throw a lot of fancy numbers and fancy drawings at you. And you're either going to get on board or get out of the way. Even worse when it came to the Mandarin, and I believe it was Cantonese as well, Zoom presentations. I mean, first of all, many of the folks who don't speak a lot of English have huge tech difficulties, right? So the fact that it was on Zoom, we actually had to provide the kind of technical know-how. Our leaders, our community members, our organizers in Chinatown were the ones who set up the Zoom. In a community restaurant, Little Saigon Cafe, I believe, so that and walked our elders through how do you hop on, how do you access these translations and the interpretations. And as you said, this is a while ago and it has been an intense couple of weeks, but if I remember correctly, they didn't even get the translation and the interpretation right. They didn't even bother to learn how to do the kind of simultaneous interpretation that Zoom allows you to do if you know how to set it up. They didn't actually spend the time to set that up correctly, and so we had people hop off, we had people leave because despite these claims of language access, that language access was not actually provided, and our folks couldn't fundamentally understand what was being said. And when our people, when it's made clear to our people, you're not interested in our participation because you're going to talk a great game of language access, but you're not actually going to deliver, our people get disillusioned, our people drop off, our people see that these developers have no interest in our voices, and they get really disheartened and then they go home. And that's what happened with those town halls, is that it was pretty clear from the jump, that they were claiming that language access was being provided, but when it came down to the implementation of it in a way that at this point, any Gen Zer who had to grow up in a multilingual household probably could tell you how to set these things up. They didn't bother to actually get it right.
Now, there's been, even now with, after the studies and everything, there's been no talk of an in-person town hall with you all and the Sixers, even with all that.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, we invited them to that one town hall right after they tried to sneak that legislation through and failed. They left early, which our elders found incredibly disrespectful. They left out the back, followed by their security guards or whoever it was, protecting them from all of the, the really mean Chinese grandmothers who were holding them accountable. And ever since then, they have been absent from our community. They keep claiming that they're having private meetings with individuals, but they're certainly not holding any sort of public forums or any sort of dialogue in or with our community. Council members Squilla and Mayor Parker have said that they're going to have some sort of, probably separately, some sort of public forum or public town hall in Chinatown with the Chinatown community, and we're excited for that. We're looking forward to that opportunity. But even that is a huge contrast with the developers, who again have shown no interest whatsoever in coming back to Chinatown since they last came at the end of, I believe it was the end of 2022.
Now, while Chinatown is firmly against this stadium, and we've also heard from Washington West, which is a more affluent part of the area, that the stadium will be encased in, and they're against it as well. You have several prominent organizations within the Black community that have connected with the Sixers: the Philadelphia NAACP, the Black Clergy of Philadelphia and vicinity, that have connected with the Sixers and said, we need this for the purpose of jobs. And there's also been a very big labor component. In fact, yesterday at Philadelphia City Council, there were a whole lot of folks who were laborers that came in with T-shirts that said pro-union, pro-stadium, pro-jobs, and different things. Has Chinatown been getting pressure from those groups? And particularly when it comes to the relationship between Chinatown and the Black community, has there been any discussions on how everybody can see each other's side and see where they're coming from?
I think absolutely. I'd say there's certainly been the attempt. Before, for example, I believe it was the Black clergy and vicinity came out. We'd actually invited folks to come to Chinatown to do a tour, to sit with us, to walk through, our side of the story and the history of Chinatown's resistance to projects like these, which just really undergird how we're approaching this and how we're seeing this project as a land grab. And we're still hopeful that folks are willing to sit down and meet with us. I also, especially when it comes to the unions, we understand their position, right? They have a job to do, and that job is jobs for our members. Where we disagree, among other things, is who ultimately benefits when Black communities and Asian communities are pitted against each other. The only people who win are the billionaire developers who aren't from either of our communities and are just doing this, are just pitting our communities against each other in order to make themselves richer at the expense of all of our communities. We've seen such a deep disregard from these individuals for any communities of color in the past, whether it is what one of them did to the Black Bottom in West Philadelphia, whether it's what one of them did to Hahnemann Hospital, which provided so many critical services to so many working class and homeless folks, as well as language access services that our communities in Chinatown and South Philly really benefit from, or as we were talking about before, Camden, where they promised 275 jobs to the residents of Camden and have only shown interest in delivering 9 of those jobs. And so what we see is happening for Chinatown, we know is happening all across the city. It was happening with the stadium stompers up by Temple. It's happening with Philly Thrive in Gray's Ferry. It's happening with what 1PA is organizing against predatory landlords, especially Odin properties. And we want to work with these organizations. We want to work with these movements to build a city that works for everybody. But at the end of the day, we also know that this division in our community, it's an important conversation. It's one that needs to be had. It's one that we need to commit to working together long term to solve. But we also know that this arena, ultimately, it's not going to benefit anybody other than the folks who already have power and already have money, because that has always been their track record. Pit communities against each other, ram these things through, and then soak up the profits while everybody else continues to struggle to get by. And
Now,
so
you
for
mentioned,
us,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, for us, like, this is an opportunity to use this kind of attention that's on Chinatown to shine a spotlight on what's happening all across Philly as housing gets more affordable, as communities and neighborhoods get pushed out. I look at what's happening with developers in Cobbs Creek, where developers are just gobbling up parcel after parcel, house after house of land, and just sitting on it, waiting to turn a profit long term at the expense of working class and middle class communities there. This is an opportunity for us to uplift all of these fights and all of these issues across the city and really call the question to council around who do they work for? Do they work for the billionaires and developers, or do they work for my community? Do they work for your community? Do they work for the working communities that actually make this city run?
Now, you mentioned the elections and specifically the problems that Jeff Brown seemed to have in terms of people giving him money that they weren't supposed to give him and different things. But when you look at particularly Mayor Parker's list of contributors, you see a lot of unions. And I mean, Ryan Boyer, the president of the building trades, was the head of her transition committee. Are you concerned that no matter what discussion you all have been promised, that this stadium will still end up being built? Because from what we're understanding, Councilman Squilla is not the person writing the legislation for this. It's the mayor's office.
I think, we especially just saw that news in the last couple of days around like how deep, in talks the administration is with the developers on this. I think we also just saw, especially, I think it just came out this morning, the developers are demanding a provision where there is an avenue to get city funding if another arena gets city funding, which is obviously deeply in violation with their huge PR push around, no matter what, this will be 100% privately funded. And so absolutely there are concerns there. And at the end of the day, we know it's important for any politician, including Mayor Parker, to listen to all of her stakeholders, stand by her stakeholders, continue a dialogue with them. But what we're hearing all across the city, like we showed with the poll earlier this week, is the city is fundamentally against this. The voters are fundamentally against this. And we believe that Mayor Parker, at the end of the day, wants to be accountable to the voters who elected her and all of the voters of Philly. And those voters, that stakeholder of the city of Philadelphia and the voters of Philly, are saying no arena in the heart of our city. And we trust that that's going to get weighed, just as much at the end of the day as the union stakeholders, who obviously represent an important slice of Philadelphia and an important slice of the Philly electorate, but aren't the whole picture when it comes to all of the constituencies that we know Mayor Parker is committed to representing.
All right, we'd like to thank Momen Seshadri for joining us on the show. There's a little more to the interview, and we'll put it all on the website so people can see it, but we have a really tight show tonight. So now I'd like to bring on Vanessa Maria Graber. Vanessa, how are you tonight?
Hello, I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. So tell people where you are right now.
Right now, I am at the Philadelphia Convention Center, and we're actually in a very small room where a town hall is going to be held regarding the proposed plan to build a 76ers arena. And what you don't see is a line wrapping around the corner and all the way down 12th and 13th Street of people trying to get into this room. Right now, they're only allowing people in an overflow room, and it's unclear if even they will be able to get in. So I'm just going to pan the camera around so you can see.
And what's the mix of people there? Are we seeing pro-arena, anti-arena?
So you see a diverse mix of people. There are a lot of people wearing Save Chinatown shirts, and there's also a lot of union leaders here holding up signs, so you can kind of see behind me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So seeing both sides of the issue, and I'm sure everybody in between, here eagerly awaiting for the mayor to begin. There is sort of an agenda. They are going to be allowing speakers. There are 2 minutes people have to speak, and there's a whole lot of rules. So we'll see how that goes. Because so many people are trying to get in, not really sure what time we're getting started here.
All right. So tell us a little bit about what you did over the weekend.
So this weekend, there was a coalition of organizations that held a rally at City Hall and then a march to Chinatown that ended with another rally with many speakers talking about how the proposed arena would impact Chinatown. And pretty much everybody there is vehemently against building that arena. And they talked about how it would negatively impact not just Chinatown, but the surrounding areas as well, such as Washington Square West and the neighborhood.
All right, so let's take a look at the video you put together.
Sounds good. First and last name?
Jason Massey.
All right, Jason, why are you here today?
Well, I'm here because the Chinatown needs to stay Chinatown and not be a playground for millionaires and billionaires.
And what's your message for city council, people in leadership, like the mayor?
We need to prioritize people and not money. There's a lot of things that the city needs, and a stadium in Chinatown isn't one of them.
There's a concern that Chinatown can be decimated after building an arena. Do you share that concern?
Absolutely. I think it's going to impact all the neighborhoods around Chinatown negatively. And Chinatown itself is a very unique place in the city, and we should work to preserve it.
A resident, as a landowner, as a worker, and a servant in the community, I say no to the 76th Arena in Chinatown. 153 years, this community has survived so many things, and this is another threat to our community. We have over 3,000 businesses, 3,000 residents in the area, over 200 businesses in the area, and we're also a cultural hub to the surrounding tri-state area. For people to shop, to eat, to worship, and also to get services, and also to study in this community. This arena is going to be like what has happened in Washington, D.C. Many of our friends in Washington, D.C., we visited. I've been there 4 times in the last 2 years and went down to the Chinatown area. If you've been down there, you'll see how desolate and how difficult and challenging that community has become.
And over a year, we waited for some bogus impact studies.
1年来，我们等来的是虚假的研究报告。
And even the developer studies say, okay, there'll be traffic gridlock every time there's an event.
就像他们的报告里面也说的，交通堵塞将是一个噩梦。
And they never even talked about the 6 years of construction.
他们从来没有提到6年的建设。
And all this chaos for a site that will be empty 271 days of the year.
这些所有的混乱将造成每年271天的场所将是空的。
The developer's own study also said the arena will destroy Chinatown.
他们的研究报告也提出了，他们的篮球场将毁掉我们的唐人街。
So I want to ask Squilla.
我们要问一下我们的市议员 Squilla
and Mayor Parker.
和我们的市长 Parker。
Why the hell is it still on the table?
你们在搞什么鬼？为什么还在桌子上谈这些？
It is time. It's time for our elected officials to represent the people, not the pocketbooks.
现在是时候，要告诉我们的这些代表们，你要代表我们的这些人民的声音。而不是开发商的声音。
It's time for a city to recognize that communities matter more than billionaires.
It has always been more than just a place for food. It's a place filled with stories. My family, who immigrated to the United States 30 years ago, spent the beginning of their life here in Philadelphia's Chinatown. It was a place to start their American dream and provided a sense of belonging. It's those qualities that we fight to protect for all.
唐人街一直不仅只是美食之地，更是一个充满故事的地方。我的姥姥30年前移民到美国，她的早期生活是在费城唐人街度过的，这是他们美国梦开始的地方，也是给予他们归属感的地方。正因为如此，我们才应该努力去保护我们的社区，让所有人都可以享有唐人街给予他们的一切。
This fight has taught us the power of grassroots organizing, the impact of persistence, and the importance of our community. SASA has organized to rally, poster, and build community, and we will continue to do so.
基层组织的力量坚持不懈的影响以及社区的重要性。我们与其他年轻人一起组织集会，张贴海报，后代回望我们，就像我们现在回望上一代人一样。
We say again and again, students say no arena in the heart of our city.
我们一再声明，学生们说不，我们不要篮球场在我们城市的核心地带。
Okay, thank you for coming out. This fight takes all of us, and that means all Philly communities. I speak from the intersection of the Asian, queer, and drag communities. There aren't many of us, only 10 Asian drag artists in Philly, me being the only drag king. But queer folks have a stake in this too. In the spirit of solidarity, I want to talk about another neighborhood just south of Market Street. Like Chinatown, it started as a place for people who weren't welcome elsewhere and still aren't in places. That is the Gaberhood. It is home to queer-owned and queer-oriented small businesses, workplaces, healthcare centers, and more. 76th Place would harm the Gaberhood too, which has already suffered a lot from predatory development. We lost the 12th Street Gym and mural of Gloria Casares, a major lesbian Latina activist. Way before that, the convention center erased and built over a bunch of Black-owned gay businesses on Filbert and Arch Streets. Right. Chinatown and the Gaberhood were practically connected once, and our struggles still are.
Philly belongs to the people, not these billionaires who think they can come up in here and take what's ours. Respectfully, Philly do not want y'all here. Cool streets? Our streets. Cool streets? Our streets. Cool city? Our city. Cool city? Our city. Yeah.
All right, Vanessa. Well, thank you so much for that. So, what's happening there right now? Have we started yet?
So the meeting is getting underway, which is why I'm in the hallway now of the convention center. You can kind of see outside, there's still lots of people trying to get into the building, and people are trickling in and going to overflow rooms further down the hallway. The mayor has said that she wanted to make sure the community was engaged on this issue before she made any decisions. So this is the opportunity for Philadelphia residents and business owners to make their voices heard. If you do want to come down here, I do believe there'll still be space in the overflow rooms. I'm not sure if it's being live streamed, although there's plenty of media here that will be covering this town hall and future events. We'll be sure to keep you posted here on the Philadelphia Hall Monitor of what happens tonight and if there are other opportunities to speak your mind on this issue.
All right, Vanessa Maria Graber, thank you so much for doing that for us tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks, Larry.
All right, now I'd like to bring in Lance Haver and Denise Clay-Murray because now we're going to talk a little bit about SEPTA, Lance, and this has been going on for a while. I feel like we're talking about SEPTA a lot for not good reasons.
Right, but we're talking about SEPTA because SEPTA is so incredibly important to us.
Yes.
If you go to work, SEPTA's there. If you drive, SEPTA takes cars off the road. If you're a store, it brings consumers to your store. If you're an employer, it brings workers to your business. If you care about the environment, you care about SEPTA because SEPTA is one of the best things to reduce air pollution, which comes from cars and urban sprawl. And obviously, if you're a school student, maybe you don't want SEPTA because if SEPTA didn't run, you'd have a better excuse not to go. But assuming most kids actually want to go and graduate, SEPTA is our school bus system. And certainly none of the magnet schools and none of the charter schools, whether you support them or not, None of the charter schools or magnet high schools could work without SEPTA. So it's incredibly important to us. In addition, it puts roughly $600 million into the businesses that surround us. So it is an economic engine. It is a lifeline for us. And of course, it takes us to visit our friends and family, allows us to get to places of worship, go out on the town, even maybe go to a restaurant if you have enough money, the movies, or some other cultural event. So it's really important. That's why we talk about it so much. And that's why every decision SEPTA makes is so critical. And that's why it's somewhat heartbreaking to see what they're trying to do now. I know that most of us have seen the stories in the Inquirer or heard it on KYW. It was announced that SEPTA didn't get the money it needed from the governor. So they're going to, quote unquote, do away with the discount that they said they were offering people who use the key cards to ride SEPTA. And of course, it's not a discount. It's never been a discount. From the beginning of the use of tokens and key cards have always cost less for rides than cash fares. And there's specific reasons for that. One is it costs less money for SEPTA to process key cards or even tokens rather than paper money. The second reason is it helps SEPTA with its cash flow. Now, I know this doesn't seem like much. I mean, if you prepay on your key card and you put $20 or $40 down on your key card, or you used to buy 10 or 20 tokens at a time, each person's only putting down like $50. But when you talk about 400,000 people prepaying $50, you talk about a huge amount of cash flow for SEPTA. So SEPTA collects the money in from the key card riders and the token riders before it needs to spend money. And in return for it costing SEPTA less to process it, not have to count the cash, not have to hire the guards to protect the cashiers and the bus drivers, and plus get the cash flow advantage. It has always sold the key card or the tokens for less per ride than the cash. So there's never been a discount. And what SEPTA is proposing now is to raise the fares by 25%. And what's confusing about that is the numbers don't really add up. If we could call up the slideshow, I just want to go through what SEPTA is saying and do all of the ads. So again, they want a 25% fare increase for people who use the key card for rides. Now, most experts who SEPTA has relied upon over the years say the recommendation is for modest increase every 2 to 3 years. No expert that I have ever heard of that ever has made a recommendation has recommended a 25% increase. And the reason for that is a massive increase of this size gets people to take fewer rides. And so it actually brings in fewer dollars for SEPTA. There's an economic term for it. It's called the death spiral. And that is a point at which you continue raising the cost of something until people stop using it. And then even though it might be $100 per hammer, instead of selling 10 hammers, you're only selling one to the point where you can't do it. Now, the size of the amount of money that's going to come to SEPTA as a result of raising these fares for 25%, according to SEPTA, is $14.4 million. Now, I readily agree that if I had $14.4 million, or Denise had it, or Larry had it, or Vanessa has it, or any one of us regular people has it, that's a lot of money. But for SEPTA, $14.4 million is nothing. Their annual operating budget is $1.6 billion. So it's not even sofa cash. It's a very small percentage. In addition, this new increase doesn't do anything to address the problems of people who are unbanked, people who don't have access to credit cards or debit cards, who don't have enough money to prepay, and they're paying cash. So even raising the key card price to the same level as the cash price doesn't address the issue. If you have a key card, you get 2 transfers for free. If you don't have a key card, you have to pay for each one of those rides. So 1 ride with 1 transfer, which is the normal. 2 transfers is a little unusual. Does happen, but the norm is 1 ride, 1 transfer. So if you're using a key card, even at the 25% increase, that will be $2.50. If you're struggling economically and you don't have access to a key card, a debit card, a credit card, that same $2.50 ride will be $5. And the new fare structure doesn't do anything to address it. So SEPTA by the numbers is pretty clearly saying that they have a problem. Now, we know that they said that they were expecting to get $161 million from Governor Shapiro in the state legislature. That's what they told us. SEPTA said they were going to get. That's what they were planning on getting. That's what they built the budget around. Their strategy of trying to win that money from the state, and it was going to go not just to SEPTA, but to every public transit system in the state. To get that money, they failed. And we can talk about that at another time. But we'll just say for the time being, their strategy didn't work. They didn't get the money. Because Representative Cephas went to bat for them, and the city delegation went to bat for them, SEPTA did get $47 million. So they needed 161, they said, to balance their budget. They got 47 from the state. The city of Philadelphia gave an additional $7 million to meet with was the projected match from the state. They're projecting to raise $14.4 million from the key cards. They're raising their parking fees by $4 million. And they say, and again, this is a hard thing to talk about without going, what? They say they're going to do away with non-necessary travel. So they're going to save $20 million. Why we were paying for non-necessary travel is a little questionable. I'm assuming that's just bad grammar and the copywriters didn't do a good job of explaining that. But if you have non-necessary travel costing riders $20 million, why is that? So at the end of the day, if you add it all up, they're still short $68.6 million. That's if you do everything that they said they're going to do. The 47 million, the 7, the 14.4, 4 million, 20 million, deduct that from the 161, and you're still almost $70 million short. So the fare increase isn't going to solve the problem. And we know that because it doesn't add up. And this just shows us SEPTA's fare structure. And the only reason this is up there is just to make the point. It was never a discount. SEPTA's not doing away with the discount. This is from SEPTA's own webpage. You can see they list the fare and what the proposed fares are. There's nothing in here that says discount. It's just an absolute way of talking about something so they don't have to say they're asking for a 25% increase in the fares, which their own consultants say is way too much. Now, does SEPTA really need the money? And this is what's hard to get across to people. SEPTA will need the money at some point. At some point, they will need more money from the state. But do they need it now? And the answer is they don't need it now. They have more than enough cash to be able to avoid any fare increase this year. And again, this is hidden in their budget proposal at the bottom of the page. So it is hard to find, and I understand why some reporters don't bother to read through the entire filing to read this. But here's what it says. The Service Stabilization Fund has a balance of $539.2 million as of June 30th, 2023, and will be used in fiscal year 2025, which is what we're in, and beyond to balance the difference between availability and need for state and local funding for operating assistance. Now, there's two things to draw from this. One is that number, 539 million, is a very low number. That was of June of last year. As of June of this year, I've extrapolated it. I could not get an answer from SEPTA of how much money is in the account right now. But if you do the extrapolation, it's 650 million. Now, I will agree that I could be off by a factor of 10, but it's still over 600 million. And they've already said they're going to use that money to close any gap. So why are they raising fares? What's the point of raising the fares? The amount of money to do away with the fare increase would be 2.1% of the reserves. SEPTA's reserves are $650 million. 25% fare increase will raise $14.4 million. Simple math. I know, Larry, you've said over the years that you were an English major. Math isn't the best thing. So you can just go on the webpage and plug in the numbers to the percentage webpage, the percentage calculator. And there it is, 14.4 million. After replacing the fare hike, SEPTA's reserve would be $635 million. And I just went out a few years just to show as an example of how much cash SEPTA has and why the fare increase is completely unneeded. So $650 million in the stabilization fund for fiscal year 2025. If they use $83 million in this fiscal year, they still have 567. If they use $100 million in the next fiscal year, they'll have 467. So left in the fund for fiscal year 2027 would be $467 million. More than enough. More than enough. So what's going on? Well, SEPTA is going to hold public hearings, and in theory, we would be able to get answers for that. And I'm encouraging people who are concerned about this to come to the hearing, but I want to be straightforward. At the last hearing, the hearing examiner did not force SEPTA to answer questions. There is no organization that represents the riders. So you have SEPTA, who takes our money, takes state subsidies, hires experts and lawyers and accountants and says, here's the amount of money we need. And then they say there's a hearing, and the other side, the people who are opposed to a fare increase, who want to make sure that SEPTA remains affordable, have no resources to put on a case. So it becomes a complaint session. And obviously the public having a right to be heard is critically important, but we shouldn't call that a hearing because it's not a hearing. It might be a public meeting, might be an opportunity, as the mayor's doing tonight, to do a town hall. But hearings mean both sides have adequate resources, both sides get to test their theories, both sides get to cross-examine witnesses, but that's not what's happening here at SEPTA. Now, I'm going to just close the slideshow out. Tomorrow, the council president's having a press conference on the need for additional funding for SEPTA. Hall monitor's going to go, and we're going to ask the question, how much money is in the stabilization fund, and why can't that be used to alleviate the need for the fare hike? Now, I know SEPTA continues to say, well, if we don't get the fare hike, we're going to have to cut service. There's two other things that I think people ought to understand. SEPTA is increasing service on the regional rail line, which is a good thing, but we should recognize the regional rail line services higher income people on average. Now, not everyone on the train is wealthy, not everyone on the train is middle class, and not everyone on the train has extra money. And not everyone on what's called the city division, which is the buses in the city, is poor. Not everyone is working class, and not everyone has no money. But overall, when you look at the demographics, wealthier people tend to use the regional rail line. People struggling with poverty tend to use the bus system. SEPTA is increasing by 99 trains the service on the regional rail lines. At the same time, they have eliminated 10% of the service on the bus lines, and they've done it in a disingenuous way. They didn't make an announcement that we're going to cut 10% of the bus service. What they did is said, well, we haven't been able to hire enough bus drivers, so we're going to have to skip rides. And when you actually challenge them, when you actually get a chance to say to SEPTA, well, how many bus drivers are you short? Then you find out that they're 10% short. And as Denise has pointed out over the years we've been covering this, a big part of the reason why they're short is they don't pay well enough. And so they train drivers, the bus drivers find out, hey, I can go to New Jersey Transit, which is physically safer, a lot less stress, and a lot more money. So SEPTA can't hire the bus drivers it needs. And as a result, the riders suffer because the buses just don't run. And if anyone who has a SEPTA app on their phone gets an alert from time to time saying, well, that bus has been eliminated because there's not enough service, not enough drivers for that line. So that's what we face. Hopefully tomorrow we'll get a few more answers from the council president. We'll figure out why SEPTA has failed so dramatically. Again, this is now the third year in a row that the governor has promised to fund SEPTA and has failed. The first budget he promised and reneged. The second budget he promised and reneged. and he promised in the second budget that he would bring it up in the fall and get it done. And there still is no bill. There still is nothing to do it. The governor continues to say, we're going to find it. But we should understand that if SEPTA says we're going to raise fares, it takes the pressure off the state legislature to find money for SEPTA. After all, why should someone vote for more money for SEPTA if SEPTA's already said we don't need it because we've just raised fares? Right. And that's the situation we're in. And it's unfortunately a dramatic problem at a time when the city has brought more people back to work. City population has started to grow again. Demand for SEPTA is starting to grow. Anyone who lives in the city of Philadelphia and has been in Center City or Fishtown or South Philly or any number of other neighborhoods, Roxborough, Maddiong, has seen the tremendous growth in buildings and housing and much more need for SEPTA to get away from the cars. SEPTA's response is to raise fares by 25% and chase people off.
Right.
And that's where we are.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. And Denise, we're going to come to you now, but go ahead.
Well, actually, I had a question for Lance. You have this fund that's a surplus fund. Is there any way that SEPTA can be forced to use that?
I can't think of any. Now, hopefully someone else can think of it. But I don't know of any law that says you can't be stupid or greedy. So I don't know. Now, again, we're not going to take time to talk about it today, but there are other things that SEPTA does that are just so bizarre. The key card itself, they've wasted literally over $100 million on that. They have these concepts that simply don't work. I don't think everything they try should work. I think sometimes we're too critical of people who take risks and the risks don't work. But when you look at the contracts for things like the key card that guarantee when the company fails to deliver, we give them a new contract. Okay, the first time you didn't get it, right? You didn't understand it. The second time you didn't get it. By the third time of giving these guys more and more money and not suing them for lack of performance or not switching companies or doing something else, it becomes pretty clear that they don't have any intention of worrying about that. Another example is that money we talked about, the $650 million. It's all in PNC Bank, and SEPTA doesn't put it in a credit union to leverage mortgages or car loans. They don't have a deal with PNC Bank. If we keep $650 million in the bank, we expect you to offer the SEPTA drivers and the SEPTA employees mortgages at a slightly discounted rate or riders at a discounted rate. There's just no use of that cash for the benefit of the SEPTA riders or the SEPTA workers. So hopefully someone else a little bit more attuned to than I am can figure out how you can say that's illegal. But unfortunately or fortunately, in a free society, you're free to be stupid.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much. And Denise, we had a big night last night. What are your takeaways from last night's presidential debate?
Well, as the debate wrapped up between Democratic presidential candidate and current Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, I'm looking at my laptop and I'm looking at my notes and I'm looking at all of this stuff and I'm like, where do I start? Because there was so much in, I went into this debate using an analogy that is actually more associated with what Hall Monitor sports contributor Chris Murray does. I used a boxing analogy. I said, all I want is a clean fight. Because if you've ever watched a boxing match, the referee starts off by saying, let's have a clean fight. And that's really all anybody wanted. They wanted a clean fight between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And what we got was a half hour into the debate, the wheels of Donald Trump came completely off. By the time I left the Pennsylvania Convention Center, which is where they had the press and spin rooms last night. Those wheels were somewhere in Denver, Colorado. They might have gone into the Pacific Ocean by now. That was how far the wheels came off. If you were looking for a policy debate, you got a teeny weeny bit of that. Kamala Harris shared a little bit about her vision for the United States if she becomes president regarding a tax break for the middle class, ending price gouging at the grocery store, and different things like that. But Donald Trump, and this is, and you own a cat, Larry, so you know that what I'm about to say is going to make some sense. There is no self-respecting cat that is just going to let you eat it.
Yeah.
And the fact that the former president of the United States was on a debate stage talking about immigrants eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah.
I just sat there with my mouth hanging open.
Yeah.
And as did most of the room. In fact, there was an audible gasp when he said that, because we were like, oh my God.
It's absolutely 100% ridiculous. The best part about it was when the moderator said, well, we spoke to the city manager in that town, and he said there's no evidence of this. And Trump's response was, I saw it on television.
Yeah, and see, that's what made last night's debate different from the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsey Davis and David Muir actually took the time to do what moderators are supposed to do in that instance, which is if you say something false, they're supposed to point out it's not false. It's false. Like, for example, and, this tells me that folks that paid no attention in biology class. If you have an abortion at 9 months, it's called a cesarean section. You just had a baby. And as Lindsey Davis eloquently pointed out, there is no state in the union where it is legal to kill a baby. There's just not one. And the fact that between that and the whole dogs and cats thing, everybody was like, oh my God. And the thing is, but it was fact checked. Unlike, debates past where Trump has been able to just get away with saying that and folks just turned it into a meme and laughed it off. There were actually 2 people that said, that's not true.
Right.
Or according to what we found, this isn't true.
Yeah.
But, that made the whole experience of the spin room for the Republicans in particular very interesting. And there were some heavy hitters there last night, like Florida Congressman Brian Donalds was there. Tim Scott, the senator from North Carolina, was there. Tulsi Gabbard, the former congresswoman from Hawaii, who was supposed to be his Kamala Harris whisperer. Obviously, that did not work out so well. I also talked to, because he brought up the exonerated 5, the people who started out as the Central Park 5, who had gone to jail for a crime they didn't commit, and that he still was, saying, he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for their execution and doubled down on it, even once they were found to be not guilty. I spoke with Dr. Yusef Salaam, who is now a city councilman in Harlem and was one of the exonerated 5. And he was like, I'm here supporting a prosecutor, which Kamala Harris used to be, because the person who is, who she's running against had no problem, having me in jail for the rest of my life for something I didn't do.
Right.
So it was just, well, at least Philly acquitted itself well.
Right. So we're going to have to leave it. We're going to have to leave it there. So we'll be back next week on Hall Monitor.